Hello everyone and welcome to this video. Now today I'm going to be doing a review of this album here. It is Swoon by Prefab Sprout. So I'll just be doing my usual thing in this video, giving a bit of background information about the record, then showing you my vinyl copy, and then looking at each of the album songs in detail. So this was their debut album released in 1984. I don't have like an exact date for its release. Wikipedia didn't tell me unfortunately, but yeah, it came out in 1984 and it was some 7 years in the making. Prefab Sprout formed in, must be around 1977, and by this point they had amassed a collection of early material they had been playing live for a period of years. However, when it came to making this debut album, they decided to focus on more of their recent compositions and more intricate material for this album. McAloon also said that around this time that it was kind of difficult for him to kind of compose songs with kind of simple chords and match those with compelling lyrics and the stories he wanted to tell in his songs. So after playing live for quite a few years, in 1983 they signed on to Kitchenware Records, which was a newly formed independent label based in their native Newcastle, northeast of England, and they were originally a three-piece band, probably up until about 1983. However, they then branched out to include a female vocalist, Wendy Smith. However, shortly after she joined, the original drummer, a guy called Michael Salmon, left. At some point, probably just before the making of this album, because on the artwork to this, they were essentially reduced back down to a trio, and all the drumming was done by a session man called Graham Lant. So it was recorded on a pretty tight budget, off the time of £5,000 with David Brewis at a studio called Palladium Studios here in Edinburgh, which is I'm pretty sure the studio doesn't exist, or I'd like to, or if it does, I certainly don't know where it is, even though it is the city I do live in, but yeah, this guy David Brewis was a member of of a band called the Kane Gang, who were also on the Kitchenware Records, and yeah, like I said, it was a pretty raw and quickly made album. This apparently all the backing music, so the drumming and bass was all done was all done in one day, and then was embellished with various keyboards, synthesizers, and then of course the vocal parts later on. Now, according to the the sleeve notes for this album, written by McAloon himself, but I think he goes under a pseudonym of Emma Wells here. It said that Swoon, the title, stands for songs written out of necessity. And upon release, the album did get quite a positive critical reception, and Melody Maker said that it's hard to imagine any album topping its achievements in 1984, while the Record Mirror called it lightly magnificent, a touch of glorious, and a little bit heavenly. However, there were other publications who were a little bit less positive. Sad Magazine felt that it would have been better with a a bigger production and bigger sounds on it. And this was this album was in kind of stark contrast to their their live performances of the last few years, and off the time of its release as well. They were slightly quite ramshackle live performances, because when they were promoting this album again they were back down to a trio, so it was very difficult to kind of recreate these songs live. In terms of commercial success, it did pretty well. It reached number 22 in the UK albums charts, which is actually really good considering up to this point they hadn't had a big charting single at all. However, in retrospect, songwriter Paddy McAloon has since expressed some dislike for this album, even ranking it as his least favourite of all his albums, whereas for me it would almost be my favourite of any of his albums. Probably spoil a bit of the review there, but yeah, McAloon's not too keen on the album. But anyway, I will show you my vinyl copy of it here. So here's the cover. Strange cover, but I like it. It sort of fits the album, I think. Again, Not sure. It's obviously there's 2 people, maybe 2 or 3 people there, but it is a slightly odd cover. Yeah, I will like give it that. Just got the track listing on the back, but yeah, I've got a lovely gatefold. But really nice packaging for like a debut album as well, it has to be said. So you've got all like the lyrics there, and then pictures of like the 3 members by this point. So you have Paddy McAloon there, Martin McAloon, his brother, on bass, and then Wendy Smith, who I believe was Paddy McAloon's girlfriend at the time. I'm not 100% sure, but she does like some great backing vocals like on here, and yeah, that's them all together there. And inner sleeve wise, nothing fancy like on the inner sleeve, and the record itself just looks like so. So yeah, that's the vinyl record looked at. Okay, so I'll now go over each of the album songs in detail. I'll score each track out of 10, and then use those scores to give us a overall percentage marking for the album. So we kick off things with Don't Sing here. So I've got the 12-inch single for this one here, and this is a great opening track for the album. Like lyrically, it follows the narrative like off a book called Power and Glory by Graham Greene, and it's a very wordy track, this one here. Like he's piling a lot like into like the lyrics, but I think it's a very well produced song. You got very crisp like harmonica on it, and really good kind of jangly guitars on it. I mean, this was one of the probably one of the first Prefab Sprout songs that I really knew and loved. It so because it's the first track I think on like their on like one of like their compilations, and I just loved the kind of like I guess it was perhaps coming from someone who was a big fan of things like the Smiths and like that kind of 80s kind of jangly kind of sound. This song doesn't sound too out of place, like too dissimilar like from that, and it does stand out like on like the album, like I suppose. Like a great track though. Unfortunately, wasn't a big single for them. It only reached 62 in the UK singles charts, but no, still a great song, Don't Sing. And yeah, we'll get a 10 out of 10. Next up is called a Q Fanfare. Now this is another really great song, a bit more of a kind of mid-tempo track, this one here. Lyrically, it heavily references the like the chess champion and Bobby Fischer, but I think it's generally a bit more about how kind of people have kind of different passions like in like life, as he sings like, as this to me, then so to you is something else. And it's a very laid back but kind of still sort of like, I mean, like Graham Lance drumming like is incredible like on this song here. Again, it is really the standout part like off like the song for me, and it's a bit like kind of musically is very very sophisticated. Reminds me a lot of Steely Dan, like this song here, like kind of just like the kind of like the perfectionism and the kind of like sort of like that, like like just like that feel like really like reminds me like a lot of like them. And now I must confess, this song, along with probably a lot of this album, didn't click with me like immediately. Like it was probably one of these things, I think I listened to Don't Sing, was like, wow, this is great, and then these tracks were maybe went over my head a little bit a couple of years back, but certainly now I really immensely appreciate this song, and for me would get a 9 out of 10. Next up is called a Green Isaac. Now this is another great song. Again, it's really split into two distinct sections, this one here. He kind of starts off very kind of slow and kind of like slow ballads. You got like these like ethereal backing vocals going on like from Wendy Smith, but then sort of like kind of like at like the halfway point, the drum beat kind of picks up, and then the song then gathers speed like at like an almighty pace, and it's just a fantastic track. Lyrically, I've read it's about a kind of like an innocent character kind of being like introduced and being kind of like introduced to kind of like the corruption like of like the world and that. But I really love the song, and I think it's kind of like especially like when like you get like towards the end, you can't help but singing along and like having a great time with it. So Green Isaac for me would get a 10 out of 10. It sure is a problem, but don't go away. Next up is called Here on the Eerie. Now this is a track which I perhaps have mixed feelings about this one. Firstly, in terms of like the lyrical content, I think is the first thing that we should consider, and it's basically a comment like on kind of other bands and artists who kind of put sort of too much effort like into like their image or their kind of political stances that they kind of forget like the substance like of like their own works. Like in like interviews around this time, McAloon had some quite scathing words to say about the likes of Paul Weller and like Elvis Costello. The latter one quite unfair because Elvis Costello was one of like the early champions like of Prefab Sprout, even covered like one of like the songs of this album like in concert, and like yes, I think that like that kind of like a stance against those kind of great artists is a little bit like uncalled for perhaps, like, but like it's kind of like it's kind of like unfair targets, I think. I think though there are some great lyrics in it, and like the point like he's trying to get across, it actually gets across well, like in terms of like the lyrics. Like some of them go like, don't start pretending that your feelings of anguish. If you prefer to dance, please stop talking of things you know nothing. The truth will make you ill, so chew on the safest, blandest of food, and avoid the specifics that might ruin the mood. Again, just the way that like he delivers those again, it's really well done, and like again, I think like it's a really good song, this one here. Like it's a good lyric, even though like kind of like the people like it's about, I wouldn't necessarily like agree that they are kind of guilty like of like the kind of charge like McAloon like levels at them like in this one here. But still a good song, and for me would get a 9 out of 10.
Oh, dear, what would I do? Don't call me possessive.
And then side one closes with Cruel. Now this is the song which like Elvis Costello covered like in like some of like his concerts like around this time. And this is a great track. This is a gentle ballad, this one here, and it's lyrically a very complex, very multi-layered song, this one here. Basically about a guy who describes himself like as like a liberal guy, too cool for the macho ache, with a secret tooth for the cherry on the cake. So kind of like, despite him considering himself quite sort of pro-feminist, and that like he has kind of these kind of deeper sort of like sexual urges, and then later on there's some killer lines in it. One of them is like, if I'm troubled by every folding of your skirt, am I guilty of every male inflicted hurt? A great track, this one here, and I like how it's like it kind of keeps coming back to that kind of cruel is the gospel that sets all free bit. That kind of gives the song a kind of sense of, it's not a chorus like, but it kind of gives it a kind of repetitive motif like what goes like throughout it. And a great track here, and notably as well, this is the only track which was included on their first best of album, Life of Surprises. I would have thought Don't Sing would have easily made it like onto there, but again, perhaps McAloon, considering this one of like their lesser albums, this is maybe a song that he can maybe like just like tolerate, like who knows, but it is certainly one of the stronger cuts like on the album. So for me, we'll get a 10 out of 10.
I couldn't bear.
Next up is called I Couldn't Bear to Be Special. Now this was the album's second single, and it was a big flop. This one failed to chart, and I can kind of see why with this one here, because it is a very unconventional, very unradio friendly, unchart friendly song. Kind of starts with these very slightly weird sort of like these kind of like where they're going kind of bowby sort of like backing vocals and quite deep, and they kind of like that kicks off the song, and you kind of then get these kind of contrasting sections between, so like McAloon's he can go from a very intense and very passionate vocal delivery, which ranges from like very kind of quiet and kind of intimate sounding to this very loud and emotionally bearing performance. And it's especially noticeable on like one like the lines towards the end, like he says like, did you mean to humble me, and then kind of shouts like, so you did it unexpectedly. Like just that bit, he's putting so much emotion into the vocal like there towards the end. But for me, it isn't one of the strongest on the album. I think it's maybe a track which will continue to grow on me, but it's certainly like an interesting listen. But for me, I think would get an 8 out of 10. like for like the time being. I do still really like rate the song, but maybe just not quite as strong for me as some of the other tracks on the album.
I'm not looking to disturb you. Just a little too.
Next up is called I Never Play Basketball Now, which is probably one of the weirdest, most absurd song titles like I've ever come across. But this is a brilliant song. Again, I love even if it's just for like the introduction of this, where it kind of like they kind of got these basketball sounds, which kind of then merge seamlessly into like the bass drum, and then these guitar chords come in, and it's just fascinating how many chords he's managed just to cram into like this introduction. And it's it's a fast-paced song, this one here. Again, with perhaps slightly more abstract lyrics on this one. And my kind of sense of it is about kind of like regrets. It's quite a kind of wistful song, kind of about things like you'll miss as you kind of move through life. You kind of and kind of basketball is just one of like these things like he kind of touches on like in like the song. But there's some great all the lines on it as well. Like one of them is like, leave it behind on an overcrowded desk where the in tray's higher than the out ever will be. Again, just the way that like that's been crammed in, it shouldn't fit. Lyrics like that, which are kind of longer, don't really fit with like the structure like of the song. Just shouldn't fit. But they really do that with this song. Like it's just he's a genius songwriter basically. Like there's no other way of putting it. And then there's another great line towards the end. Like, think of all the things that grew here long before we moved here. So it's perhaps got like a slightly more political stance as well, perhaps like on this one here, which is slightly hypocritical when like you compare it to like here on the Eerie. Like, but still a great song though. And yeah, again, I like musically how it kind of does this kind of stop-start structure like of it, like as well. Like it's a little bit jerky, but it's still very sophisticated and still very clean kind of sound. So I love this one. Like I never play basketball now. So for me, that would get a 10 out of 10.
How could a future like that go wrong?
Next up is Ghost Town Blues. Now I really like the instrumentation like on this song especially. You've got this kind of plunky, kind of toy piano kind of sound like on it, but then the kind of when the bass line comes in, like Martin McAloon's bass line, and just the way it kind of moves around, like you've got the piano, but then the way his bass line kind of fits in with that, it just sounds brilliant. A little hard to grasp lyrically what this one like is about, so I would be grateful if anyone does have any ideas what this song could be about, like in like the comments. Please do like leave them in there, leave them there. Like it would be like much appreciated. I couldn't really find any articles where McAloon's explaining this song like or anything like online. I mean, perhaps it's kind of is perhaps just about a ghost town. You know, he kind of then talks about like knowing like the mayor like of this hysterical town and worked himself up from the dirt in the ground. So yeah, perhaps about that. But then it kind of goes on and there's all these other different references to someone called Anne Garland, who again I tried to look up, but you know wasn't really getting like anywhere. So again, if anyone knows what the song like is about, I would be like very grateful. But yeah, no, a really good song here though, and yeah, we'll still get like a 9 out of 10 there for Ghost Town Blues.
So if these stardust memories fail.
Next up is called Elegance. Now this one is a lot more like off a political song, which again sadly doesn't sit very well compared to like here on the Eerie, like where like he's kind of like sort of like having a go at like these artists like who kind of write about like politics like at like the time, or maybe he was just writing that from like a different perspective, who really knows. But yeah, no, this song is very much about the kind of like Margaret Thatcher government like off like the time. He sings like, here are those who own the world around your own and say you want to swan 1-to-1, hey kid, they own the pond. And then another verse goes like, there are those who rest and those who make the beds, and should you seek redress, can't you guess, hey kid, hey child, they own this mess. And it's a great lyric, and again a little bit more acoustic based musically, this one here, a little bit more straight ahead. It's not quite as schizophrenic or sort of like all over the place as some of like the other tracks. tracks are, so it is quite pleasing. But again, I love the way the tension builds throughout this song here. You kind of McAloon's vocal he gets more into it, like as he goes on like with this song here, so it doesn't feel like it's a kind of verse chorus verse structure, even though it perhaps maybe is more so compared to some of the other tracks. But still, though, yeah, Elegance for me would get a 9 out of 10. Another really strong song. Next up is Technique. Now this is a like a slightly oddball song, this, like I would say, but a brilliant lyric though. It's kind of it's about a young stargazer who kind of wishes to work in Jodl Bank, which is a space observatory in Cheshire, and it's got like some great lines on it, like, "But I can never work there. What a shame that I'm not clever. It's for men with horn-rimmed glasses and for distinguished A-level passes." And it's kind of about like this guy, he's wishing that he could do like this dream job, but but he hasn't got the grades to back it up, kind of thing. And like the people like who are working like in this job are described as like their eyes don't fill with wonder when you speak. And it's a song with lots of different sections on it. And it's almost like he's crammed a bit too much like into it, like this one here. Like, it's kind of this is a song which is very all over the place, and it's very again, it takes a lot of listening to kind of for you to understand the song and to kind of get it like a little bit. But again, you've got a lot of different musically recurring riffs like and motifs like throughout like the track, almost like at random. Again, there's no real structure to this song like at all, really. But it is just songwriting like at its most out there, like I would say, like without sort of verging into kind of like just sort of pointless like experimental kind of sound, mess about the sound. This is kind of quite cutting edge songwriting like throughout this album, but on this song particularly.
I long for the moon as it looks from the earth, but to...
And then the album closes with a slightly dour note, I would say, Green Isaac 2, and this is certainly for me the weakest track here. Essentially, it's a kind of reprise of the kind of slow section of the first part of like the first Green Isaac. And I suppose it's nice enough rounding off for the album, but I would have maybe liked a kind of bigger closer, something a bit more grandiose maybe to finish like the album. This song is just, it's very short, but it's not one I would ever play like in isolation like off the album. So yeah, for me, that one would get a 7 out of 10. Okay, so overall, this album would score 90%, so I think this is a brilliant album. It's a weird, adventurous, but also fun record as well. Like, there's a lot of humour, like a lot of fun in this album. Like it's a record I certainly, like, having had allowed it time to grow on me, is one that I like immensely enjoy now. I think there's a lot packed into this album. Like, it is a very dense record, both lyrically and musically, but it's that combination, it's the fact that it doesn't tire, this album. It's like you need to give it a few more listens than you perhaps would like another album, is what kind of keeps like me coming back to like this album. And I also like as well how it kind of, I suppose, has more of an indie feel to it than some of like Prefab Sprout's other albums. Kind of from the next record, Steve McQueen onwards, they would go for this very polished sound. Like, apart from a few exceptions like throughout like their like discography, but generally they'd go for this very polished, very sophisticated sound. Whereas on this album, even though the songwriting is probably more complex on here than on any other Prefab Sprout album, it's kind of delivered in a kind of slightly ramshackle way. Again, you can really hear all the guitars like on it. Like, well, it sounds like you can really hear like the guitar playing on it. It's quite minimalistic, like in like some ways, and I think that's what gives it its charm. It's that kind of like slightly wobbly vocals like in places, and slightly rough like instrumentation, but kind of playing like sophisticated parts. It's just an interesting mix, I think, and for me it is certainly probably like their album like I go back to most, maybe aside from Steve McQueen, because that is a almighty classic like right there, but certainly like either like my favourite or second favourite Prefab Sprout album here. So that's been my review of Swoon. So I hope you have enjoyed, and like if you've got like any requests for future reviews, please do leave them down below in the comments, and I'll see you all next time for the next video. Goodbye.